And here we are on the weekend. It is Car Con Carne still happening at home. It's 12 o'clock on a Sunday. And I've spent my morning cleaning, as I sometimes do on the weekend. And as I clean, I'm always listening to music. I have had the turntable going not that long ago. And that is a perfect segue to the fact that music is such a part of all of our lives, especially as we're all locked in at home, sequestered. And that comes to the question, or leads me to the question, what's the best way to listen to music? Is it streaming, which a lot of us do, or is it vinyl, or is it cassettes? Joining me today, I have Dan Jarvis from Midwest Action, also the fantastic Chicago band Diagonal, and Andy Weber, who is one of the owners of Smashed Plastic, which presses records on the northwest side of Chicago. Love that facility, providing an important service to musicians near and far. Before I get into this discussion, I wanted to share something with you both. This conversation today, this podcast we're recording right now, stemmed from my last conversation with Dan Jarvis when his band Diagonal was on Car Con Carne. I'm going to just play something for you guys.
We got a clip. There's a clip.
Because I remember the first go around with cassettes, and they were always an inferior way to listen to music. They snapped, they broke, they didn't sound as good. Why is there a cassette renaissance?
Chicago's seen it pretty heavy.
Yeah.
So I started a cassette label a few years ago.
Oh shit! I'm sorry. Great idea. I'm sorry.
But so I can speak to it. It's
sorry,
either.
Okay. Classic foot in mouth moment.
Is that what I sound like? Do I really sound like that?
It's over Zoom. you still sound great. You still sound articulate. But the point was, I was down in cassettes. We had the conversation. You've got Midwest Action. You cassettes are, to the point you made, they're an easy and effective way to get music out there. And as we started talking more, we started talking about vinyl, and we talked about Smashed Plastic, and then we arrived at the decision that maybe it was a good time to have a discussion about cassettes versus vinyl. And here we are, because Andy is a vinyl pressing entrepreneur in Chicago. You are a cassette producing entrepreneur on your own, Dan.
I suppose.
So before we lead into it, let's talk about some backgrounds. Dan, talk about Midwest Action.
So Midwest Action, to give you the brief story, it started with my now fiance, Alyssa Welch. She started it as a music blog back in like 2011 because she wanted to get into shows for free, write about bands, that usual stuff. Uh-huh. We met a year later. We started dating, and we grew it into a little bit more of a fleshed out blog, and then eventually into a record label. We actually put out a 7-inch record before we did anything with the record label. And that was a big reason I pivoted to cassettes. Was back then, this was like 2015, we put out a 7-inch record, and we did it in the Czech Republic. And if I were to do it now, I would do it locally because we have a plant now, but that's another story. But it took 6 or 7 months. It was very expensive. We sold a fair amount of it, but I still have like 300 in my basement. So just as a cost-effective measure, we thought like, well, Chicago's kind of into cassette tapes. What if we went that route? And I looked more into it, and I learned a lot from the first 3 or 4 cassettes we put out, and realized me dubbing them at home on my crappy old tape deck wasn't the best, but I found a friend that had a better setup than me and was doing it professionally, Bill Tucker, my buddy. But yeah, it was a learning experience to figure out the whole tape market. But once I did, we were churning out 3 or 4 releases a month sometimes. And it became just a way quicker way we could work with more bands and really get more music out there. And I'm not going to like fight that tapes sound better than records during this whole round table, or that it's the superior method or anything. But I think it deserves a spot on the table, the place in the conversation. But it became a really fun, quicker way and cheaper way, that because we're just 2 people in an apartment running a record label. We're not we're not Drag City or Warner Brothers, but it became a cool way for us to get more local music out there, and that's what it's become. And we've got over 60 tape releases. Some of them are behind me here, but yeah. And then nowadays we're doing a little bit of everything: tape, vinyl, CD, even. So we like all formats around here.
Well, what's interesting, cassettes saw a 103% increase in sales over the first half of 2020. 103%. This year could see cassette sales topping 100,000 for the first time in 17 years. So there's some win in your sales right now.
Yeah, a little bit.
Now let's move over to vinyl records. Let's talk about Smash Plastic. We've talked about this on the show before, Andy, but give some brief Smash Plastic history.
Yeah, well, we've officially been pressing for 2 years, which just is mind-boggling. It still feels like we started yesterday. Our officially will be open for 2 years coming up on February 1st, but we started back in, well, what year was that now? 2018, October of 2018, actually pressing here in town. Yeah, we just, it's interesting what Dan just said is why we're here. It is, it became really hard. He just profiled it there in the 7-inch that he tried to put out. It became really hard for a lot of people in this town to be able to produce vinyl. So we wanted to give the independent scene a place to go. And we have, and they've come in droves, and it's exciting. And it looks like 2021 will be expanding and having more capacity to be able to serve this market even more. So
that's great news. That's huge news.
Yeah.
I mean, the idea that any business is growing right now, especially
Yeah.
a local music focused business, is awesome to hear.
Yeah, well, the good news is, as you just said with the stats on cassettes, it's the fact that physical music is selling right now is fantastic for the music scene in general. Obviously, there's parts of the music scene, the live venues that are suffering right now. But the good end of this is, I just had a friend tell me yesterday, he's like, yeah, I'm buying tons of vinyl right now because I'm not spending any money at bars. It is, there is a one hand is watching the other hand on that right now. I think most people would much rather be spending their money at a local club, and buying records from the merch table at a local club.
Sure.
It is one of the good byproducts, at least for us and for the music industry, that physical is selling.
I do have the latest Impulsive Hearts record right behind me.
I noticed that. Yeah.
I noticed that. Yeah. Midwest Action release pressed at Smash Plastic.
Yeah.
That was
Best of both worlds. Yeah.
That was a good collaborative thing to have kind of lingering in the background.
Perfect.
I mentioned
and a great record.
I've been telling everyone I know to listen to it. Danielle is just phenomenal voice, songwriting talent. I mentioned cassette sales stats. Vinyl records, 26% of music sales last year were on vinyl. 14-year high for vinyl. Already this year, vinyl has outsold CDs for the first time since 1986, with 2 months left to go. People, to your point, Andy, they're buying physical music, and they're taking cash that they would have otherwise earmarked for a couple rounds at the bar and having something to hold. Let's talk about having something to hold, the physicalness, because I may have told you this before. I've certainly said it on the podcast. I used to have a huge record collection going into the late 90s, a massive record collection. Then as I started collecting CDs and records stopped getting made, and after you move with vinyl enough times, I thought, I'm done. I can't do this anymore. I'm not going to, nothing new's coming out. I've got all these CDs, the wave of the future, and I donated all my vinyl to charity. Fast forward to the 21st century, streaming's great. You have access to everything, but there is something to be said, not just about, seeing a J card on a cassette or liner notes in a record. It's just the immersion in that piece of music. For 25 minutes aside, I am locked into that artist. I'm not fast forwarding. I'm not skipping ahead. There's something to be said for the experiential part of music. And I'll let either of you kind of speak to that.
Go ahead, Dan.
Yeah, one thing you gotta say that vinyl and cassette lovers share is that physicality. Is people that I have my tapes on one side, my records on the other side here, and yeah, people like us like to have something to look at in front of us, and I mean, a big record cover is amazing. I grew up looking at my mom's records and mesmerized by them, and it's the same with tapes. And we did some really interesting things with tapes. We were hand painting them and hand stamping them, and there's that hand drawn element to it too. But yeah, I think the physical medium, even though it seems to be like a dying art now, aside from those stats you threw out, I don't think streaming will never really top it. And if you're, like Andy was saying, if you're giving your dollars to the band by buying a physical tape, physical record from them, whether it's at the merch table or on the Bandcamp Free Friday when they're waiving fees, that's helping a local band way more than the fractions of a penny on Spotify. So yeah, I think whatever format you land on, it's going to help a band much more than putting on Spotify. So that's
That's exactly what I was going to say too. I mean, it really comes down to support. If you're into independent music, the only way to really support them is by buying a record or merch. And you realize, I mean, now with all the publicity that's been coming out from the CEO of Spotify, putting his foot in his mouth and realizing that independent labels really aren't making that much money off of Spotify at all. It's pennies on the dollar. And it is, I always say streaming and physical go hand in hand. It's wonderful that nowadays, think about it back in the day, James, we used to go into record stores and you kind of would go, oh yeah, this album art looks cool. Or, you've never really heard the record. Now you can sample an entire record before you buy it. And so they do go hand in hand, but don't fool yourself if you're out there and you believe that you're streaming local independent music and it's going back into the pockets of the local independent bands. That's the difference.
Yeah, I'm not even sure I understand the math, but basically an artist gets paid a percentage of the overall share of people who do stream, and it's fractions of pennies on the dollar for an independent band. And the Bandcamp Day is definitely a force for good. The next one's coming up on Friday. And I've always been a collector. I think I got this. My grandmother was a collector. She would go antiquing. She would have collections of things like shopping bags. She would have all kinds of crazy collections in her house. And I think I picked that up from her as a kid when I started collecting music. And there's something about the acquisition, something about the hunt, but finding stuff that your friends don't have. And for me, finding local bands on vinyl has been really fun. Like being able to collect local music on record, because it's special. These aren't mass production pieces, maybe 500 pieces per run. There's something really unique and special. And the bonus of supporting bands, I think, is such a wonderful thing. But the collector in me, the music fan in me, has completely fallen back in with physical media. It's not this relic of the past. To me, it's a way forward for a lot of us.
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head with owning something. I had a friend who, back in the day, it always meant something to say, I own that record. I have that record. Oh, I bought that record back in 1983 or whatever it might be. It meant something. And I was saying that one day to a friend who wasn't a collector. I said something like, oh yeah, I have that record. And he's like, he picked up his phone and he's like, I have every record. And that pained me to no end. This is before Smash Plastic or anything, but it really got me thinking. And have you really released a record if you just stream it or have it, digitally available, or you haven't really produced anything unless you actually have produced something physical. So, and I feel the same way with ownership. What happens if Spotify goes away? You no longer own that record. So I think that's another factor of physicality of owning that. Not only just the support, is you as a collector, you have that now.
I have a lot of local musicians, actually independent musicians, period, who either watch the video or listen to the show. As far as cost, and I'm not looking for direct quotes, but as far as cost to get something off the ground, how feasible is it for an independent artist to produce a run of cassettes? What's a typical run of cassettes? And then how does that work for a 7-inch or a 12-inch?
Yeah, I mean, a typical run of cassette, I think maybe it's changed a little bit in the last year, because even cassettes now, like you said, are becoming a little more popular, and there's a little bit of that problem. Andy was talking about how it's almost some places it was hard to get tapes done for a little bit because there was all of a sudden these magnetic tape shortages, which I don't know, I won't go that far into that, but on average, we were putting out tapes for about, unit cost is probably around $3, $2.50, $3 a tape. And then you can sell that for $5. You could sell it for $10. You could sell it for $7, wherever you want to land. But when we wanted to just move merchandise, we'd say, hey, 3 for $10, 5 for 20. We do these big deals when we were doing tabling events at Pitchfork or Chirp Record Fair, and framing it in that way where we can say, hey, you can get 5 albums on cassette for $20. People started picking out more stuff. People said like, well, that looks pretty cool. Like Andy was saying, just on album art sometimes, because if you're a casual fan of local music, maybe you don't know who Diagonal is or Black Glass or Impulsive Hearts yet, but you see that album art and think that's pretty cool. Man, $5, I'll check that out. So the entry fee for cassette is real feasible, and as a record label, we help front that cost to the band, and we work together with the band on that. I mean, it's for vinyl, it's definitely a little steeper, but I think having I might be a little biased because I work at Smash Plastic as well, but having a local plan like Smash Plastic that is working way more hands-on with bands, and you don't have to worry about shipping a record overseas. It's become a lot more practical for a local band to press vinyl, which has been great.
And so do artists pick up their vinyl from Smash Plastic? Like,
oh yeah,
can they forego shipping? Which, if I were an artist pressing a record, I'd want to be there. I'd want to load up my own vehicle with my own record. Like there's something really satisfying, I'm sure, about just getting them hot off the press, so to speak, and loading them up and taking them home. It's like bringing a kid home from the hospital.
Yeah, it's actually really satisfying for us too. It's after you work really hard on getting this record to sound right, look right, and sleeve it and everything. It's really satisfying to put it right in the trunk of somebody who is buying this record, who's produced this record. So yeah, I mean, and speaking a little bit to what you guys were talking about earlier, we set our minimums pretty low compared to the industry when we got into this, purposely to make sure more people were doing vinyl here in the city. And obviously it's worked out pretty well so far, but it's about just getting more on that merch table, and getting more vinyl on that merch table, and giving not necessarily an alternative to tape, because obviously the cost difference is quite different. But if somebody was doing just cassettes or just digital or just CDs, because vinyl seemed to be this, big, scary, expensive thing where you go off to the Czech Republic and you get it 6 months later, we now allow people to, especially pre-COVID, come in, talk to us, answer all your questions in person, see the press running, come back and watch your record getting pressed, and then come back and pick it up and we'll place it right in your car. So it hopefully put more merch out there. Hopefully it got more vinyl out there to the masses here in Chicago.
Watching records get made, it's like the adult version of when I would go to the Museum of Science and Industry or Lincoln Park Zoo as a kid, and I'd stand in front of the Mold-O-Rama and watch a monkey get pressed out of wax. This is the more mature music fan version of the Mold-O-Rama.
Yeah.
Watching
I want one of those machines.
I do. Yeah. That'd be great at the plant. We should try to get one.
Yeah.
That's classic Chicago stuff. So for some historical perspective, cassettes were developed in 1963. Mercury, the record label, brought them to the U.S. about a year later, and production largely discontinued in the early aughts. Is that ramping back up?
Yeah, actually, you see a lot of these kind of mid-major labels have been getting back into the cassette market, like Polyvinyl and your Joyful Noise. I mean, Merge, I think, like some of those level of artists, are doing tapes again. And I think it's cool to just have it available, have all formats, because a lot of times I want to grab the record, but maybe I don't have the $20 or $25 on me, but I have $8 to spend on the cassette version for right now. And I think why not have the option, especially if you're a label that's got a little bit of a deeper pocket and you can put together a CD, a record, and a tape. You got something that's going to appeal to just about every listener out there, and you're still going to get a digital download with it either way you get it to. So, yeah, I think I'm sure we're not producing tapes as big as we were in the 80s at this point, but it's definitely seen a resurgence, which I think is cool. It's cool to see these bigger labels and bigger artists putting out cassette versions these days.
No doubt. Now, for perspective, Edison created the phonograph in 1877. The vinyl era, I guess the modern vinyl era, really started in the late 40s with 33 1/3 records, 45 RPM on 7-inch. And here we are today. Again, it's amazing how it has swung back, and it means something different than it did in the 1980s, in the 1970s, and the 1990s. Vinyl, just the act of owning vinyl and listening to it is just different. It's such a much more deliberate thing for a music fan to do. And it's funny, as I talk to you guys, even ramping up to this interview, I'm like, shit, I need to get a boombox. Like, you know,
I got a couple around me here, but
I'm sure you do. Like, it's been a while, but it's weird. Not weird. It's just, I hate the fact that I walked away from physical forms of music for as long as I did. As a music fan, as a collector, I'm kicking myself. And I love that you guys are doing what you're doing.
Well, truth be told, I think a lot of people did. I did as well. You know, it was the era of, you know, downloads, Napster, all that. I mean, it was intriguing, right? I mean, you could now house everything on your phone, you know, or in your MP3 player. It was, you know, for anybody who ever DJ'd anywhere, it was like, wow, I can bring my whole collection with me. I'm glad that it swung back the other way. And it had to. And a lot of it comes down to the experience you've been talking about, James, of sitting down and listening to a record or listening to a tape. You actually have to take the time to sit there and listen to it and kind of decompress. And I feel like in this day and age where everybody's running around a million miles an hour and your connectivity is, you know, massive, it is nice to just kind of, you know, I'll leave my phone upstairs and come down into the basement and actually listen to a record because I need to just shut down from what's going on.
That's it.
mm-hmm.
That's it. Checking out for a while.
Yeah.
And doing the things you love without the distraction. I'm finding so many different ways to do just that. Duck out of social media, duck out of the internet, and just listen to music. Catch up with myself, trying to dismiss the fact that the world is literally and metaphorically on fire. All those things at the same time.
It helps.
It helps. All right. So looking ahead for both Midwest Action and Smash Plastic, let's start with Smash Plastic. You said you're in an expansion period. It's going to roll into next year, which is awesome because business, I love knowing that artists are keeping you busy and that there's a lot of music being made right now.
Yeah, I mean, part of this was really the progression of the business to begin with, and some of it has to do with the situation we're in right now, I think, too. But yeah, no, the expansion we've always had eyes on it from the beginning. We didn't think we would be a one press shop for the rest of our lives, but now we're like, okay, where does this end? Is it 2? Is it 3? Is it 4? Who knows? But the big thing for us is, you know, as we don't take major label business or anything like that that's going to eat up the machine, but as we're starting to get some bigger orders from some of these mid-major labels, I want to make sure that the local business can still have capacity at Smash Plastic. I don't want people waiting 6 months for the 250 records.
Because the locals will always be there for you.
Right. And that's the lifeblood of our business. I know some pressing plants that have one client is 70% of their business. I mean, that's insane. You know, the other day we were sitting around talking and we couldn't even name our biggest client, you know, because there's probably like 4 or 5 that might qualify in that. And so the diversification of the business of having all these bands just coming to us independently really makes for a nice, healthy business. And hopefully that just continues to grow.
And you're a great resource for the community. I love it. Dan, what's next for you?
Midwest Action in 2020 kind of took a break, but between 2019 and now we put out 5 vinyl records, and they were all done at Smash Plastic. So as Andy said, like that we're a prime example of that. Like we wanted a community based local plant, and we saw Smash Plastic and we ran for the hills with it. And so because we put out 4 12-inch records over the last like few months, we're kind of chilling out on releasing for a little while, but still selling on our Bandcamp page. And you know, so if Bandcamp Friday comes around, you're looking for stuff to buy, check out the Midwest Action Bandcamp page. We got records, CDs, tapes. But now maybe next year, hopefully there'll be some new stuff from Diagonal, and maybe some other of the Midwest Action artists are still recording. A lot of those artists have gone on to bigger labels too, and bigger local labels. So I'm always happy to see that bands we gave a start to by putting out a tape have I'm never offended when a band goes to the next higher step to a record label that can get them out there a little more. But
Sure.
yeah, till then, I'm going to probably spend the winter recording in the garage and making records with Andy. But
I love it.
And just to tout what Dan's doing, Diagonal does have a new record coming out pretty soon. It's all done. It's ready to go. Right. It's
in the can
right now. Yeah. So hopefully we'll be pressing that soon. I am also a personal fan of the band, so
you and me both.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's our Carl Saff, our local lacquer cutting masters, got it in his queue, so it'll be actually put to wax soon enough.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Lacquer in the front, poker in the back. Is that how that goes?
Sure.
All right, guys. Thank you so much for doing this.
Yeah. Thanks for having us on.
Yeah. Thanks. It's been